sorry, to unlock private finance for landscape restoration and accelerate sustainable and land use investment. So the goal was quite simple. We wanted to develop a business incubation program that sourced, mentored, and incubated commercially viable restoration ventures in a scalable manner also. So 2 cohorts later, here we are with additional partners even, such as the FAO, for instance, such as Partnerships for Forests, and with even new initiatives being developed out of this model. There are many learnings that we have been able to acquire from this initiative, and this is why we are here today. The goal is to share with you really the approach of the Restoration Factory, which is to develop commercially viable investment-ready enterprises. We also want to share the model for replicability and scalability, obviously, being tested through the factory. And we believe that these learnings hopefully can help your projects, whether they are linked to the restoration sector or even other value chains. These learnings are valuable in any case in a general manner, and this is the reason why we are all here today. So just a quick agenda. Leading the discussion today, we'll have Jonathan Gestens from UNEP and Julie Murat from Bridge Rebellions. And at the end of the presentations, we will also have short session with David Cheborio, who is from E4 Impact, one of the local entrepreneurship support organizations we have worked with in the program, for a quick Q&A discussion. So in the meantime, might everyone please leave any questions that you might have in the chat, so we will address them during the Q&A. While some of our participants are talking, for instance, during their presentation, if there is anything, please don't hesitate to write to us in the chat. We would be more than happy to answer your questions in the dedicated time. And so I think we are going to go ahead and start with the first speaker we have today. So in order to share the purpose behind the creation of the Restoration Factory and the goal it seeks to achieve, I'm going to invite Jonathan Gessens, who coordinates activities of UNEP Finance Initiative on REDD+ and sustainable land use in Africa, and where he is focusing on private sector engagement and private sector finance within the context of development of REDD+ strategies and REDD+ investment plans. So I'm going to invite Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Elena, for the introduction. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Very happy to be here with you today and to be given this chance to provide the perspective of UNEP in the design of this collaboration with Bridge Rebellion towards building this incubation program for restoration entrepreneurs. Do we have slides that we can pull up and share on screen?
Yes, we do.
Perfect.
Give us a second.
So, and perhaps to complement what Elena said about me, I'm an economist by training. I joined the environment program of UNEP 8 years ago. First, to look at sustainable business models in the agribusiness sectors in support of a program that some of you may know called the UN REDD program that was designed to tackle forest deforestation and degradation globally. And more recently, I've moved to the restoration space, both from the perspective of working with the private sector to design and promote, support innovative eco-entrepreneurship for restoration. So that would be aligned with nature positive objectives, that would be good for planet, people, and jobs, but also with the view to unlocking more finance, both public and private, so that this transformation towards restoration can scale. So this is what I'm doing now, and this is basically the reason behind the partnership that we have now with Bridge Rebellion. But I will say more about that in a second. So thank you. So I guess it might still be useful, even though more and more people are fully aware of the challenges that we are facing, why it's so important to address restoration, in its wider sense. When I say restoration, I'm also including rehabilitation, regeneration, conservation, and protection of natural habitats and ecosystem for our collective future. And the reason, if you allow me to state a few very sobering facts, is quite simple, is that we're losing nature and we're losing the supporting services and basically infrastructures that nature provides at a very alarming rate. So a few facts that I wanted to share with you to give you a sense of the magnitude of the problem and the urgency of the problem. Today, 25% of the world's land is degraded or permanently lost. Half of the tropical forests worldwide have been destroyed since the 60s. Every second, more than 1 hectare of tropical forest is destroyed or drastically degraded. That means that both for people and nature, it has some very adversarial and severe impact. We estimate that 3.2 billion people are now globally affected by the impact of land degradation. It means that if you just look at forest ecosystems, that concerns 1.6 billion people in tropical areas, oftentimes the people who are least capable of accessing resources to work on adaptive solutions. So it increases poverty, it decreases the potential for growth, the potential for decent livelihoods. So it has a very, very strong and severe impact on people, but it has an equally severe impact on the other species, on nature at large. For those of you who have followed the news, WWF came up a couple of weeks ago with a report showing that 69% of all the wildlife population has now disappeared. And if you look just as freshwater species, a staggering 83% of all the freshwater species population have disappeared since the 70s. It's pretty dramatic. So we need to do something about it. And that something has been charted with a number of different initiatives and basically platforms for commitment, the most important of which being the Bond Challenge, which includes now more than 70 countries who have committed to restore large scale of their countries to achieve a full restoration of 350 million hectares of ecosystems being basically brought back to life. And you might say it's a massive effort, but it's an effort that can also generate very positive returns, both again in terms of what we can gain on jobs, on improvement of livelihood conditions for local populations, but also in terms of ecosystem services rendered by nature. So according to some estimates, it has been demonstrated that if we were able to restore those 350 million hectares of degraded land, we would be able to generate $9 trillion in ecosystem services. Even more so, we will also be able to absorb between 13 and 26 gigatons of greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere, which represent potentially 25% of the emission gap that we could close using restoration practices. So if you look at the potential in the forest sector, if we were to rehabilitate 12 million hectares of degraded land per year, that would basically contribute to achieving the Paris Agreement goal of 1.5 degree increase in temperature. So all in all, basically restoration has this massive potential to improve livelihood conditions for people, improve ecosystem services from nature that businesses use and rely on, and create more resilience, more stability, and more long-term profitability for everybody. So just to say that the fact that we focus on restoration should be seen as something of high priority for everybody. The challenge being that when you compare this crisis and the importance of restoration as a whole for future, and the amount of financing and the amount of business development that has been put towards restoration practices, restoration activities, you see a mismatch. Just one last thing I wanted to say on the previous slide is that according to estimations, the cost of restoring is not trivial. We estimate that it should be around $800 billion to achieve the bond challenge. But the issue is that at the moment, only 20% of that funding need has been met with existing resources. And 90% of those resources are coming from the public sector. So the private sector has not yet been fully unlocked or tapped. And so that has been the sort of the initial challenge that we were facing when we basically initiated this collaboration with Bridges. How can we create a proper business environment that would attract financing? How can we basically harness the true potential of private finance so that our solutions could scale? Next slide, please. And I think the issue is, I mean, it would be fair for most people looking at this for the first time to say, why is it that when you look at the magnitude of the challenge and also the magnitude of the opportunity, there is so little funding that goes to restoration activities and restoration initiatives? And I guess the reasons are manifold. But if you allow me to kind of differentiate between the public and the private sector, you have very different roadblocks that up until now have prevented a greater the greater adoption of restoration practices and the greater untapping of finance at scale. From the public side, the main issue is that the public sector is interested in achieving rapid impacts, which means that they have a tendency to look at a vast portfolio of projects where they provide some support, but typically not enough support to really achieve long-term transformation. It is due to partly the project cycle dynamic that in the public sector, typically every project lasts 4 or 5 years and not more. And 4 or 5 years is a really short time, to come up with an idea that can be then eventually turned into an actual venture that demonstrates viability. So it's not enough time to go through the process of developing a business, but it's also a reluctance from the public sector to get too much invested because of the fear of distorting the market potentially. So they see the application of grants, capacity building support, technical assistance as a way to create enabling conditions for the market shift, but they rarely want to push that support sufficiently far and for sufficiently long to create long-term changes in the market, in the fabric of the economic system. So that's from the problem from the public point of view. From the private point of view, the issue has been for a long time basically the result of two things. First, restoration is complex. Restoration is something that is relatively innovative compared to business as usual practices, especially in the agribusiness sector. And so it's risky. And that risk is not something that most investors, most private sector agents are very willing to take on. And so they remain a little bit skeptical or hesitant to invest because they don't have yet a track record that would show them that doing restoration could actually achieve the double, triple bottom line that is promised. So that's the main issue. The second issue is that for those private finance intermediaries or investors that are actually interested to achieve impact, typically they deal with a very, very small pipeline of investable projects. There is not enough good projects existing to date to constitute a decent portfolio of investments. which means that if you're an impact investor and you want to invest in restoration, you have basically to turn yourself into a project developer. You need to support projects almost from their ideation phase and all the way to the end when they can access market and they can start to generate profits, which is a very long lead up time, which is not something that impact investors have typically, because they need to answer to some either donors or shareholders. And that lead up time is also using most of their available resources, meaning that they can work on 1, 2, 3, 4 projects at a time, but not more, which is preventing scale. So those are the main problems from both the public finance side and the private finance side. And this is what we have tried to address to a limited capacity with a new sort of model of technical assistance that we're currently deploying, which is basically from which the collaboration with Bridge in the form of the restoration factory stems. Can you move on, please, to next slide? So the idea is to harness the fact that the public sector has the ability to access a great number of small holders, communities, cooperatives, people invested in the quality and the healthiness and the resilience of their ecosystem. So the public sector has that capacity to engage a lot of the right participants in the different value chains. The issue with the public sector is that they are not designed or willing to go through the entire process of business development. And so what we thought, and on the other hand, the private sector is also constrained by the fact that they don't want necessarily to help projects from their initial stages because they don't have time for that, because this is not their expertise. And so they would prefer being presented with an healthy funnel or pipeline of investment-ready projects. So we thought we could combine those two perspectives into a value chain model whereby the public sector funding could help create a healthy pipeline of project development targeting restoration activities, so that we can more effectively, more quickly churn out a new generation or ecopreneurs doing restoration at scale, but by applying, the rigorous and structured methods that come from the startup world. And so what we have attempted to do now is to create an ecosystem of service lines, which has at its very core the restoration factory, but which is also supported by other tools like the Restoration Explorer, which helps ecopreneurs figure out what type of business model is more basically compatible with their restoration objectives, or the Restoration Marketplace, which would help projects graduating from the factory to find either investors or market access intermediaries, people who would be willing to buy from them and to enter into long-term agreements, so to solidify their business model and also their cash flow prospects. So the idea is really through all the important milestone stages of business development that we could provide public funding to support the restoration transformation, a pipeline of ecopreneurs that would grow over time, and that we will follow them through each of the steps so they don't risk the very typical risk of falling, of not succeeding when things become difficult. And so, as I said, at the very core of that value chain approach stands the Restoration Factory, which was actually the building block of that method. I know that Julie is going to talk more about the process, how it basically came about. But just to say that the way we essentially started this collaboration is very simple. I was managing a restoration project funded by the Jeff, which had the objective and the ambition to create investable opportunities in 10 African and Asian countries for restorative ecopreneurship businesses. And when I basically onboarded the program, I realized very quickly that there was a massive capacity building gap that was preventing the restoration practitioners in the ground to make the right decisions from a business point of view. We were working with environmentalists, restoration experts who had a very clear idea how they wanted to go about their restoration objectives, the type of solutions to implement on the ground. What they were lacking was a sense of how to turn those restoration objectives into commercially viable businesses. What sort of market value to obtain, at which price point, what would be the clients for those services. So all the building blocks that you would expect from traditional business development, that was lacking. Hence, they were developing very good projects supported by public financing, but they were not in a position to, when the public money runs out, move on to private resources and to a commercial model that would ensure that they could basically outlive the public financing. So at the core, the idea was, how can we basically provide that capacity, but in a way that also can scale? Because the typical approach for international organization is that we develop projects from scratch. Each country is a new project, or it's very difficult for us to create a standardized approach to implement and deliver technical assistance. And this is where, and this is probably what Julie will also mention, is we discovered the Bridge program and the platform, and we realized that it could be actually a perfect complement for what we were trying to achieve, because within the Bridge environment, you have all the components that you need to build effective capacity building for entrepreneurship. And you have also a standalone turnkey model that you can deploy very effectively in many different countries, regions, situations, contexts, without having to necessarily redesign everything piece by piece. And so really what we wanted to, where we were very lucky in establishing this partnership is the ability that it had given us to really sort of leverage that system of implementation and delivery, and to at the same time ensure that going forward across the portfolio projects that we manage, every time there is a need for entrepreneurial capacity building, we can essentially activate the Bridge collaboration through the Restoration Factory and mobilize the right resources to train ever greater number of people on good commercial practices to support their needs. How am I doing with time? I think I might have spent my 20 minutes already, perhaps.
We are still okay. You can go ahead. Okay,
so just saying a few more words about the two cohorts. So as I said, this collaboration stemmed from a restoration project that I was managing at the time. We wanted to test the approach in the context of our program through a first cohort, where we invited one entrepreneur per country. We had 10 countries at the time to join the program, to go through the stages of the program. And the idea at the time was to see whether by the end of it, we could have created better conditions for market accessibility and also to unlock finance. And what we realized is that the restoration context is perhaps different from other sectors in that typically capacity is low, internet accessibility is also low. The Restoration Factory being built on the Bridge platform relies on internet connection because it's an online program. And so we thought that we could perhaps even enhance the online platform by complementing it with more local support. And this is exactly what we're doing now in the second cohort of the program that we're running at the moment in Kenya, is that we have this very well-structured and comprehensive capacity program that hasn't really changed because it's really great, but we have complemented it with local support coming from enterprise support organizations. We have 2 of them in Kenya at the moment, and basically they manage any potential issues that might arise from the field in terms of lack of capacity or lack of internet accessibility, limited capacity, need for boosting the morale or for creating a extra sort of support when it's needed for the participants to complete the program successfully. And so now we feel that by having this hybrid approach, we can do 2 things. We can really sort of cater to the needs of the restorative operators on the ground, hence increasing the likelihood that they will succeed and they will end the program with the potential to become really viable ventures. And on the other hand, by retaining the online capacity of the Bridge platform, that's giving us the ability to then deliver the program in other geographies extremely quickly. We started with 2 countries. Now, people within UNEP who have been basically made aware of the tool found it so interesting that they are now they now want to run the program in their own setup, in their own project. And so we have many more factory programs being either about to start or in basically the process of being designed in Southeast Asia, in Africa, probably in Latin America as well. So for an international organization like UNEP, it's a great tool to both achieve local impacts, but using technology to scale rapidly and at a cost that is manageable for us. So I'm going to stop there and let Julie provide more information into the partnership.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for this very clear presentation. I think lots of people have commented in the chat that they found it also very interesting and very helpful. And without further ado, I think we are going to introduce our second speaker. So Julie Murat is the co-founder and COO of Bridge Pavilions. She's born in France and now based in Spain. Julie believes that innovation sets a direction for our society, and therefore we should support diverse founders talking problems that matter to create economies that are truly resilient and inclusive. She's also a facilitator of summits for Global Changemaker with Changemaker Exchange and training to become a coach. Julie holds a master's in international business from ESC Paris with a minor in social entrepreneurship from Universidad de Chile. So I'm going to leave the floor to Julie. Thank you for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Elena. I saw my whole life below my eyes happening. And thank you, Jonathan, for all the context provided on this program. And I must say, I was feeling quite heartbroken by the data points that you shared initially about land degradation and loss of wildlife. I think it really shows the amplitude of the problem we're grappling with. And at the same time, feeling quite energized because hope comes from action. And I think we've been making lots of progress with this program in particular, the factory. And also hopeful to be in this room among people that are really committed to making a change for people and the planet. So yeah, feeling this big sense that we're both the problem and the solution. And I would love to tell you a bit more about the factory, how it works in practice and how it all started. May I ask Afia or Elena that you share the slides again? Thank you so much. So yes, as Jonathan mentioned it, the Restoration Factory, it's really the result of a collaboration between UNEP as the key development player that we know and Bridge for Billions, a social enterprise that I co-founded in 2015 together with a small team of very passionate people about entrepreneurship as a vehicle for a flourishing society that takes care of people and the planet. And now we've grown to become a distributed global team of 40 people. And in those few years, we've supported close to 5,000 founders from 123 countries. So the factory is one of the programs that we run, but we have many others, because our mission is really to democratize access to quality support for entrepreneurs globally. And as Elena mentioned, we know that local innovators are the people who most understand the local problems and are in the ideal position to really solve them. So this is why we're trying to support local entrepreneurship to create more resilient societies locally. So we create all kinds of programs with public entities, with corporates, with foundations, and each program is focused on a specific target group. So that can be, for example, women entrepreneurs or people with disabilities, people living in a specific country, or it can be on a specific sector, like it's the case here with the Restoration Factory and the focus on preserving our lands and biodiversity. And can I have the next slide, please? The Restoration Factory is truly one of my favorite partnerships because of 3 reasons. The first one is the focus on creating an economic fabric that fits into the planetary boundaries. We saw how big the problems are earlier with Jonathan. The second is because of the very agile approach we've had working with the UNEP team in constantly evolving this program based on field observation, on seeing what works, what doesn't work. I will tell you a bit more about that in the next slides. And the third reason is really the multi-stakeholder collaborations we've been able to set up. So it's Bridge for Billions and UNEP working together, but we also have an array of partners such as FAO, Partnership for Forest, local incubators like E4 Impact, Mount Hub Kenya. I think some of them are present in the room today. So we really try to focus each on what we do best and provide an experience for early stage founders that is integral and brings some sectorial expertise about restoration, but also expertise on how to build a viable business. And I think it's been really showing great results. And to illustrate a little bit what I mean by an evolutive approach working with UNEP, we launched our first pilot program in 2020 for about 15 entrepreneurs from 10 different countries. And we have participants from countries as diverse as Pakistan, China, Tanzania, Cameroon, and mentors mostly from Europe at the time. And Jonathan touched upon this earlier, but soon we realized there were some challenges with this initial model of the Restoration Factory, challenges that are very pragmatic and practical, such as a time zone, access to computers and a stable connection. Also the need for a bit more of local mentors that really understand the local economy, ecosystem, ways of doing, also navigating multiple languages. We have founders in Cameroon that were French speakers and others in Pakistan that were English speakers. So it was kind of hard to generate this cohort feeling and connection for people in such different realities, time zones, and even just ecosystem realities. So this is why for the second edition of the factory, we took a moment to zoom out and look at what had worked, what didn't, and see how we could enrich the program to really make this model stable and scalable to other regions of the world. And we decided to focus on only one country at a time. So right now we have a cohort running in Kenya, and we designed the whole program to make it much more adapted to the local reality. So one consequence of that is that we moved to a training of trainers model, where we select and partner up with local incubators in the country that already have all the knowledge of the business environment and the challenges that entrepreneurs typically encounter. And we put at their disposal our methodology, our technology, our ways of doing. We even train them in facilitation, in how to handle a diverse cohort, and try to really fit more the local needs with such a model. So let me show you in the next slide what it can look like in practice. So any Restoration Factory program, and Jonathan mentioned we're also launching in Southeast Asia now, starts with those set of stages. So first we set up this multi-stakeholder partnership and try to build on each other's strengths to create a program that fits the local needs, the local context. And specifically, we select local entrepreneurship support organizations, so-called ESOs, so local incubators that can be the local face and touch points with the entrepreneurs on the ground. Then there is a whole cycle of this training of trainer. So we have different training sessions on Zoom with the local incubators to really help them increase their capacity in program management, incubation knowledge, understanding the Bridge for Billions pedagogy and how we can use it for the Restoration Factory. And we also co-design what are some additional sessions that may be needed based on the segment of entrepreneurs we are going to support. So here in the Kenya program, for example, we've had experts come in and share their knowledge about tree nursery, beekeeping, high value crops, and different value chains that our entrepreneurs are working on. And so once the local incubators are trained, we start this co-managed incubation program with a blended online and offline approach, mostly online, but if the entrepreneurs live in the surrounding of the local partner incubator, they can also go in person to that center to meet people, access an internet connection, meet other peers from their cohort even. So we collaborate with the local incubators and UNEP to keep track of how the program is advancing and how every entrepreneur is able to build a bankable business plan step by step. And after roughly 6 months, which is the direction of the program, there is a big closing ceremony where each entrepreneur is able to pitch either online or in person how their business is evolving now, and also potentially connect to local investors, funding mechanism. And as Jonathan shows, UNEP has a whole strategy for the post-factory stage. And then we also don't just stop here in terms of keeping track of the entrepreneurs. We have a very strict 2 years impact assessment system where roughly every 6 months, entrepreneurs are being asked about whether the company is still active or not, how many funds they raised, how many employees they have, and therefore jobs they generated, and a series of metrics also on the restoration aspect. And finally, once a cohort is over, alumni are done with the formal learning stage. However, they still belong to this community of restoration entrepreneurs, and they can keep interacting and sharing best practices and knowledge. And just a quick zoom on this training of trainers model. This was the main difference between the first pilot program of the Restoration Factory and the ones we are doing now. What we're trying to do is really to recruit, select, and train local incubators so that we can put our value adds together and work with the best of the local knowledge and the technology that allows the model to be similar across geographies and also very structured. The benefits have been immense. I think in the Q&A part of today, we will hear a little bit from David from E4 Impact, how it's been the experience. And also for us, working with local incubators means that we're trying to strengthen the local entrepreneurship ecosystem. So not just working directly with the end beneficiaries, the entrepreneurs, but also ensuring that some level of capacity is built for those players to better deliver programs in the day-to-day, even other programs than this one. May I have the next slide? Great. So the incubation journey, we spoke a lot about it. It's roughly 6 months, and each entrepreneur has access to an online workspace, a private incubation workspace where they can collaborate with their co-founder if they have one, and their mentor or mentors. Sometimes they have several mentors. And they have access to interactive business tools. So you can think of it as a Duolingo for building a business plan. Every week they're expected to complete some activities, and it's really a learn by doing approach. They're not watching videos or reading PDFs. They are working directly on the model of their own enterprise and answering the tough questions about who are the customers, where to go first, what could be the marketing plan, what's a viable financial plan for the next 3 years. So they're really having a deliverable generated every few weeks with either a marketing plan or a P&L, a profit and loss projection, and those kinds of things. They also have personalized one-to-one mentoring. Each entrepreneur has at least one mentor, and they meet on a weekly basis, usually on Zoom for 1 hour. And then they have group coaching sessions and expert sessions that are delivered by partners on the topics that are more restoration focused. And here you can just see a glimpse of the platform. It's a methodology that we've created at Bridge for Billions and that we kept enriching with every partner we work with, and also inspired by cutting edge entrepreneurship methodologies such as MIT's Disciplined Entrepreneurship, Lean Startup, Blue Ocean Strategy, et cetera, et cetera. So we didn't really reinvent the wheel. We just kind of aggregated and made a logical, evolutive flow to entrepreneurship support and the creation of a business plan. And just a quick zoom on the Restoration Factory Kenya, our bigger program launch to date. We have 47 entrepreneurs that we're supporting in several priority counties in Kenya and 48 volunteer mentors. I do want to highlight that all mentors are volunteers, which is really something unique in this model as well. And we've been really like amazed to see how many professionals are ready to dedicate an hour a week for 6 months and just generously share their expertise to help a small business go forward. And we're very, very proud to be working with 2 local incubators in Kenya, E4 Impact and Mount Hub Kenya. And because of the type of entrepreneurs that we've been supporting as part of this program, we had additional expert sessions on those topics. So beekeeping and honey, tree nursery and planting, waste and water management, and high value crops and livestock. So we're really trying to add this sectorial expertise so that the ventures can be understanding in what ecosystem they evolve and how to make their venture more commercially viable. And yes, just to zoom to end on some of the projects we've supported, Segen Enterprises is one of them, led by Samuel. It's based in the Kisumu County of Kenya, and they have commercial forestry development, and they've to date planted more than 500,000 trees and mobilized the local community to plant half of that roughly. And then we also have Calvin from Ecopoa. It's a social business that creates eco-friendly bags. They work mostly with youth in the slums to turn paper waste into those bags that can be used by retail players such as hotels and beauty stores. And on the right, you can also see a testimonial from Piranto Mosiani from Naropil Honey Enterprise. He says he used the models to explain his venture to a partner, and he was able to secure a 5-year agreement to get 10 beehives every year. So he was very grateful also for the business structure of the restoration factory that allowed him to better present his project to stakeholders. So I think now I can give back the word to Elena, and we will have a moment for questions and answers, and also hearing from David, our local incubation manager.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Julie, for this presentation. I think it was very interesting for everyone to see how the restoration factory has adapted to specifically the environment it has been evolving with, and especially the training of trainers model, which is quite interesting, and is going to lead us to the next part of the event. So we are going to open the Q&A session, as you mentioned, with our partner David Cheborio. David, are you online?
I'm online and I can hear you very well.
Hello, David.
Yeah, though here in Nairobi today there is a blackout, so I'm actually connecting with my phone. But I hope you can hear me well. Yeah.
We can hear you perfectly. Thank you so much for joining despite this this difficulty on your end. Thank you so much for your availability. So David, can you have maybe like a quick introduction, and then I will ask you a question we have for you about the program.
Sure. You'd like me to introduce myself?
Please, if you don't mind, yes.
All right. All right. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Cheboriot. I'm the director of E4 Impact Entrepreneurship Centers. We have about 7 centers in different African countries, and we're operating, running our entrepreneurial programs in 20 countries right now. My role in the center is really to support our teams in the different centers, run successful incubation and acceleration program. I actually have a strong bias towards training or capacity building of entrepreneurs in business modeling and sustainability development. So that's basically me. Yeah.
Thank you so much, David. Maybe a quick question for you, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So what, in your experience, really has been some differentiating elements of the Restoration Factory, and what have been some of the success factors for the program?
All right, great. And thanks for that question. So I think from where I sit, and actually we've run several programs, incubation, acceleration, short training programs, and so on. What I would say is differentiating and success factors for the restoration programs are about 5 points from my opinion. I think one is the specific and unique sector focus that this program has. So in this program, it targets eco-entrepreneurs that are focused on restoration, the restoration of landscapes and ecosystems. So this very specific focus. So it's not a generic program. It's not a program on tech or agri-foods that are very common in Africa, in East Africa, and so on, but very specific. And I think that really differentiates it, because we want to build and really build and showcase robust revenue generation enterprises that are focused on eco entrepreneurship. So this is one factor that is really important, and it's unique and differentiating. The second factor that I've seen implementing this program is the access to the online tool that is provided. So this access to the self-paced online toolkit, that is a learning platform with different features. So it has different aspects needed for creating a successful venture. I think Elena spoke about it or mentioned it already. So from value proposition, competition, stakeholder analysis, developing the business model, pricing and business viability, financial projection, the impact map, the growth plan for the enterprises. So this is a self-paced tool, right, that they actually use it. So the access to this tool is very important and for the success of this program. And the tool has, different aspects. It has the tips for entrepreneurs, room for the deep dive, and further reading as they work on building their model. And actually, a milestone-based assignment that they're building for their business. So there is around the tool, and full last with the mentors. I think this point has been made, who are really subject matter experts, and really they really work with entrepreneurs one-on-one to really realize their business model, and they act as sounding boards. So if entrepreneurs, and we've seen situations where entrepreneurs have certain questions, how can I do, which would be my links to the market and stuff like that, and the mentors have really come in very well, freely, to give their time and really support the entrepreneurs. Then the third point that I see as a point of interaction is actually what we provided, or what the program provides, which provides the interaction with sector experts who are seasoned entrepreneurs and actually run and practice or run the business on a day-to-day basis. And within our cohorts in Kenya, we had different sector experts. So we had sector experts in tree nursery production, forestation, water and waste management, high-value crop production, beekeeping and honey processing, livestock production, and so on. And in this one-on-one interactions with the sector experts, the entrepreneurs could actually ask, because we're dealing with very early stage enterprises, right? And entrepreneurs, they would actually ask the sector experts, how did you actually succeed with your business? What were the challenges? I'm experiencing these challenges. Which markets can I access? If I'm raising funding, where should I go? And so those are very interactive sessions with these sector experts that actually happened. And then the fourth point, as a unique and differentiating element, is actually the fact that this restoration factory program worked with local incubators. So in Kenya, ourselves as for Impact, and then the Mount Kenya Hub. Anyway, the selection of the incubators was very critical, because it's necessary that the best, let's say, incubators already who had prior experience in supporting eco entrepreneurs who are brought on board. So for us, this is not an added activity, but it's a continuation or an enhancement of what we've been doing already. So that was very important. But it didn't stop with this fact that we already were doing it. But there was a lot of capacity building that we had to go through, which Bridge for Billions and UNEP did on us to make us really ready, especially to use a tool and how to guide the entrepreneurs. And anyway, what we provide as local incubators, is access to experts, access to networking opportunities for the entrepreneurs, so markets, funding, and also where possible co-working spaces. So we have, as if for Impact, also the regional hubs in Isiolo, in West Pokot, in Laikipia region, and some of the restoration factory entrepreneurs could go and work from there. So this was another added value. So feet on the ground and place for eco entrepreneurs to work from. And then the last point is really the working with the seasoned mentors, right? Who and the mentors, the good thing was that they were not only local, but they were also global. So they brought in global perspectives on how our local entrepreneurs could actually grow their business. And they also brought their networks of investors, other access to markets and so on. So I think that these are really the 5 points that really differentiate the differentiating elements and the unique success factors of this program. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your intervention, David, for your testimony. I think it's so rich and so interesting to hear the various opinions of all the stakeholders for this project, because the different stakeholders have we all have the same objective in the end. We all have different ways of reaching it, but we all have the same objective, and it's really interesting to see these learnings from all the different actors and how we are able to put it all together to reach the same objective. So without further ado, we are going to open the Q&A session altogether. We already have a few questions in the chat, so please bear with me. I'm going to take them in order. I think the first one is more oriented towards Jonathan. So we have a question. After completing the 6 months incubator program, the main driver is to acquire investment for the business. How does this link into public funding, as Jonathan discussed? Or do the small enterprises only target private investors?
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Elena, for the to Ayesha for the question. And I think it also echoes the previous question by Hannes about, and that was directed Julie on potential role for venture capitalists and how do we connect the cohort and the participants to sources of funding, especially from the private finance side. So I think in this situation, at least from the perspective of UNEP, the value of one of the most important value elements of this program has been the ability to insert it into pre-existing or existing projects that are funded by donors or by multilateral organizations, which means that both in Kenya or in the context of the previous cohort, we are in a position, once projects have completed the program, based on the quality and the characteristics of the projects, to offer them grants from the existing project that we have to either test their business model by designing an MVP and a small business that they would be able to run and test, or by providing additional technical assistance if this is what is required. I think in all fairness, by the end of the Restoration Factory, the hope of UNEP was to equip the participants, the entrepreneurs, with a better sense of what it takes to develop a solid business proposition. And this is completely achieved, at least with the new code that we're running in Kenya. It's very clear this is exactly what the entrepreneurs obtain at the end of the program: a clear sense of what they need to do, how they can do it, and also a good understanding of the market conditions and the different operational aspects of their business. What remains to be done is to connect them, for those of them who were coming in with just an idea, to market opportunities, to their first clients, to their first contracts, so that they can initiate a cash flow. They could start receiving revenues for their products. They could get a taste for how to negotiate a contract, how to work with clients, how to respond to the client's requirements in terms of quality, quantity, specifications. And so this is really, I guess, at the end, for instance, of this second cohort that Julie described during the presentation, this is what we're trying to achieve: is how can we take not necessarily just the best, but all the entrepreneurs that are ready and willing to continue the journey, and accompany them all the way to their first clients, all the way to their market access. And when you have proven that there is a demand for what you sell, and that you can sell it at a price that is basically generating enough profit for you to be viable, then, in my view, this is where you introduce the investment component. And then you start looking at, okay, how to expand, what would be the CapEx or what would be the OpEx necessary for the expansion of the business. And this is all the steps are included in the value chain approach. At UNEP, we have this marketplace strategy that will attempt to ensure facilitated connection to investors and market access providers. But I think it needs to be an integrated approach. It needs to be basically a sequence of service lines that are provided to the entrepreneurs to accompany them. And the factory positioned them very well, but then it needs to be completed with additional support. And this is what we observe very often in the finance work that we're doing at the Commons Finance Unit is investors need to be proven that when they invest in something that will, if not generate a return, at least basically protect their investment, their money. And so this is, I guess, what the factory provides in part, and it needs to be completed with the actual, basically, realization of the business potential of the venture. I don't know if Julie or Daniel want.
I think you explained wonderfully, Jonathan. I can just compliment. I think it's a really tricky question because each business is its own world and have specific requirements. But what I see happening most times is that, especially with this incubation stage and early stage entrepreneurship, entrepreneurs believe many times that they need investment in order to make revenue, but actually they need to make revenue to be taken seriously by investors. So it's kind of this chicken egg problem where we're trying through the program and the tools to really direct them into trying to make revenue as soon as possible with a minimum viable product approach, with just trying out who are the interested customers and how to start having a commercial proof of concept. And that will make them more trustworthy in the eyes of investors. I see on the chat some people asked about a venture capitalist, for example. I would say right after this stage of the restoration factory, the incubation part that we saw today, most entrepreneurs are not ready to pitch to a venture capitalist. They could have technical assistance, they could have a grant, as Jonathan mentioned. They may be able to secure from angel investors a pre-seed round or a seed round, but most times they still need to do more of the commercial work before being able to pitch in front of funds.
Thank you, Julie. I think that also answered the second question, which you mentioned, which was indeed about venture capitalists and how the large investors see the risks for these entrepreneurs. The next question we had, I think, was oriented towards David. What have you learned about the type of funding needed by these entrepreneurs to grow their businesses? Is there a gap in capital available? What type of funding is needed? Any good examples of funding vehicles in the region, David?
So I think on the question of the type of funding, and we're speaking about early stage, I think Elena just mentioned a few minutes ago, the kind of funding they need is actually funding almost for proof of concept. So a bit of grant funding at the beginning, a bit of angel investment at the beginning could be the most ideal, because of also the way the program is structured, right? We are really looking at very early stage restorative businesses, and that's the kind of funding they need. And sometimes they could also put their own investment, and that is a way in which, sometimes they call it sweat capital, because that they could do that, bootstrap. And I think proof of concept and proof of, let's say, initial market entry is what they need. And with that, they could, let's say, sell a bit, so bootstrapping themselves, and that's it, unless there is very early catalytic or grant funding, or sometimes competitive funding for competition to win a certain award. That's the kind of funding that works at that early stage. So I would think that if you ask me if what kind of opportunities exist for that early stage funding, I think one is that there are competitions around. So business idea competitions, and someone can go and pitch and actually win. And I think we're embracing, you know, aspects of investing, also public money, or sometimes some impact investors could be. Sometimes it could be some foundations that are actually putting in some disposal of money to see the most creative and innovative businesses that, let's say, are restoring environment or responding to climate change. And those are the kind of, let's say, opportunities that exist to entrepreneurs. Sometimes even ourselves, we have our own internal awards just to be able to, let's say, propel that early stage entrepreneur to get some seed capital to start. And when they scale, then they can go for venture investment. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, David. Thank you for that. I think also the next question will be oriented towards David and maybe Jonathan. It was asked by Aisha, who's asking, land restoration requires access to land. How do these small entrepreneurs in Kenya acquire land to restore? Very interesting question.
So if I can go fast, and then Jonathan can come in, and thanks Aisha for this question. I think that one aspect, well, also when we're looking for the eco entrepreneurs, we were looking for community-based enterprises, and actually the ones that we got, especially if it was dealing with land, were actually actors that have brought together a community that are living, let's say, in a community land, and they're thinking about restoring that land through an income generating a self-sustaining activity, whether it is livestock, whether it's some high value crops, harvestings from forest and things like that. And so in a certain way, I would actually almost say they have access to the land, but it depends with which kind of value chains they're coming from. So if they're doing afforestation in a certain forest or near a certain forest, or they're promoting, now in Kenya, we in the past we had a policy that we needed to reach 10% forest cover. The current government is saying we need to get 30% forest cover. So there's the demand, like for seedlings, for trees, and so on. So sometimes you might not need such a big land to do let's say seed nursery propagation, but then it will be sold, or you will get a bigger market to people who are doing afforestation, or actually people who need high valued crops like coffee, and they need the seedling. So if that was a youth group with an entrepreneur behind, or who is driving that group, they can do that and then find a market.
Yeah, and perhaps just to add to what David just said, which is exactly what the situation that we were dealing with in Kenya, is that, obviously from the perspective of UNEP, having access to land or land ownership or a deed, it would be part of, the set of safeguards that will basically be included in the selection criteria to decide, who can join the program. For us, it's extremely important that we are supporting enterprises and communities and ventures that are actually very aligned with, restorative objectives, the restorative of the UN decade on ecosystem restoration. Also, I saw another question asking, how do we determine, what constitutes a restoration investment? So that basically comes from a body of research and studies on, really sort of meaningful, effective restoration practices developed by many research institutes, including WRI and WCMC. And so basically, this is the starting point that we use. We look at the business model, we look at its alignment with restorative objectives, and that includes also accessibility to land. And from there, we decide whether or not it makes sense to offer the program to the partner.
Thank you both for clearing that up. I have the next question from Tim Radin from WCS and Trillion Trees, who's asking, what qualifies an entrepreneur for assistance? How does a factory decide what constitutes restoration investment? Maybe for Julie or Jonathan?
If you want to continue, Jonathan, I think it builds on the previous explanation.
Yeah, I touched upon this question already in my previous answer. So yeah, we have developed basically a framework for selecting the participants to the incubation program. So which includes many different dimensions and aspects. Some of them are more directly related to the operational capacity of the community or the entrepreneur to benefit really from the incubation program in terms of, you know, available resources, time they can allocate to the project, whether or not they're working with a team or alone. But we have other dimensions basically related to accessibility to land, to prior knowledge of restoration best practices, whether they would have the know-how to run the business that they're pitching to the incubation program. So we have a set of criteria that we're using, and this set of criteria could be shared. I mean, everything that UNEP
I think we have a bit of a...
I was wondering if it was me.
Jonathan, can you hear us?
So while
because we try to be as transparent as possible so that we use
You froze for a moment, but I think you're
yes,
back.
we lost you for a bit.
Oh, apologies. When did I when did I freeze? Sorry.
Oh, just a few seconds.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, the criteria comes from basically recommendations and guidance that have been produced by, you know, this community of restoration experts and practitioners. I mentioned already WRI, the WCMC, IUCN, UNEP itself. So we're not reinventing the wheel here. We're basically using guidelines that have been agreed upon and used by the community to select the participants. And then the second part I already answered, like the type of restoration investment. Could be agroforestry, it could be ecotourism, it could be sustainable forestry management, it could be soil enhancement. I think what we do is that we try to stick as closely as possible to the list of restoration best practices that has been produced by the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And by FAO and their experts. And that is the universe of investable opportunities that we are working with.
Perfect. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Julie.
Elena,
The
maybe I
next...
can just comment on this and answer
Absolutely.
about
Yes.
languages. Because one thing is the selection criteria, and I think Jonathan explained very well what they're looking at in terms of restoration. Another thing is the prerequisites that we ask from entrepreneurs. What's really the baseline that guarantees that they will be able to make the most of the program. So on that, I can share a few variables that we're looking at. One is the phase of maturity of the company. So we're looking for pre-growth phase entrepreneurs. So either they have a bit of a developed idea or a concept or a prototype, or in some cases, even an early stage company, an SME, a startup making a little bit of revenue. Then we are looking for people who speak the language that the program is delivered in, and I can answer the other question about languages in a little bit. So in Kenya, it's all in English, but already the scaling of the restoration factory that we're doing in Vietnam and Thailand, we've translated the whole platform and materials to Thai and Viet, so that local entrepreneurs can also do the program in their language. And we're specifically looking at mentors that are native speakers, even if they live abroad and belong to the diaspora. Then in terms of equipment, it's really important that they have a regular and stable access to a computer or a tablet and good internet connections. However, we also designed some workarounds to that for the second cohort, one of which would be joining in person E4 Impact or Mount Hub Kenya. And another one is providing small data grants for the entrepreneurs, so they're able to pay for having a more stable connection. Then in terms of digital fluency, it is at the end of the day an online program. So it does require a basic digital ease, knowing how to use Zoom, how to connect to a platform and use the different tools that it provides. And then the motivation, I think, would be the biggest criteria. It's a very difficult program. Some entrepreneurs have referred to it as doing a mini MBA at the end of it. So it requires about 8 hours of work every week for 6 months from the entrepreneur side. So we're really looking at entrepreneurs that are either already full-time working on their venture or very motivated to make this their full-time projects, and that are ready to put in a lot of work in the program.
Thank you, Julie, for the clarification. I think this also links to the next question we had from Marcia Mar,
Yes.
who was specifically talking, I think she mentioned the indigenous women in the Amazon who could benefit their community, family, and therefore the environment if equipped. So thank you for that. So I have one more question in the chat.
I can answer regarding languages. Sorry, I skipped this part.
Yes.
So right now we have the program available in 10 languages just recently. So we have it in English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, and we have also Latvian and Slovakian because we have a project with the EU Commission, and then Armenian, Thai, and Viet. So those are all the available languages today. We are already considering to launch in Arabic or other languages. But already with those 10, the potential market coverage in terms of early stage entrepreneur is very wide. So we're also focusing on trying to improve the methodology with the existing languages rather than translating to a whole lot of new ones. And then just to react to Marcia's question, we've had one program in the Amazons with La Caixa, the Spanish bank, and it's proven to be quite challenging, but we also overcame a lot of hurdles by working with local partners that could provide access to a stable internet connection and computer. So if you want to discuss that, I'm happy to have a chat separate to here.
Thank you for clarifying. I have a question about implementation in how the countries are chosen to implement the restoration factory. From Barry Numbi, who is asking, when do you plan to pilot in DRC with local incubators such as Sinolu, especially in the conservation field, whereby alternative business models are looked for as mechanisms for sustainable practices in forests and species conservation into national parks?
I guess that's probably for me. I think it's clear by now that the first phase was about testing the prototype and basically improving on its different dimensions so that we would feel confident that we have something that can work for restoration ecopreneurs in a variety of contexts, and that could be then deployed at scale. So going forward, the UNEP approach is going to be twofold. On the one hand, we will continue working with internal projects. So wherever we have activities or wherever we're partnering with other NGOs, international organizations, and there is a need for capacity building on entrepreneurship to support restoration, we will try to implement the factory. And on the other hand, one thing that we're envisioning doing in the future is to have a wider call for proposal. So asking countries, like in the case of Barry's question, it could be if you have a need and if you have already identified potential interested entrepreneurs who could benefit from the incubation program that we have developed with Bridge, drop us a note. And then we can look at whether we could allocate resources to run the program in your context. Perhaps co-sharing the cost or finding basically a model that could work based on the resources that you have available and those that we can also allocate to this. That would be my answer.
Thank you, Jonathan. So indeed, Barry will be more than happy to further discuss. So let's hopefully get in touch after this event and see where synergies are possible. But it's always obviously interesting for the purpose of scalability to look at how the model could be applied in so many different ecosystems at the same time, obviously. And we have a follow-up comment from Marcia Mar, who's saying that the community development model.
I can answer that.
Sorry?
I can answer that, Elena, because I was typing an answer.
Sure.
I totally agree with the points that you are making, Marcia. I'm also happy to discuss further. Right now, as the program is designed, it does require that some pre-requirements are met in terms of digital literacy, access to a stable internet connection and computer. And what we've seen in past programs in the Amazonia is that the people who have this digital literacy are mastering already either Spanish or Portuguese. That has been our experience so far. It may not continue like this in the future as we're trying to extend the inclusion of the program. So when the opportunity comes, we'll be really open to add indigenous languages. So far, we've been able to pilot this with already Spanish and Portuguese.
Thank you, Julie, for the clarification. I have a question from Arthur. Can a training project in biodiversity and environment be part of this program? Did you want to take this, Jonathan or Julie?
It would be good. I'm not so sure I understand the content of the project per se. Is it an entrepreneur-led project? Is it a venture, or is it a donor-funded project that is basically focusing on capacity building in the context of biodiversity and environment, and whether we could run the factory in the context of that project?
Arthur, if you are still around, would you mind maybe clarifying a bit the question for Jonathan? Thank you. I think that's the last question I have in the chat. If anyone else has some clarifications or anything they would like us to discuss, please don't hesitate to drop it in the chat. We have a few minutes left, so let's make the most of it.
I guess I will use that time perhaps to yeah, so addressing Arthur's point is that going forward, really the idea is that we continue enhancing the content of the training by adding things that are specific to the restoration world. This is already what we're doing with the expert sessions, with the expert masterclasses. So we have a lot of materials on restoration that we've been able to collect and use from either from UNEP, from Bridge, or from the different partnerships that we have. But I think ideally going forward, this is something that we want to solidify even more by being more sort of detailed in the sort of the solution that we can propose for each of the restoration intervention that could be that could benefit from the program. So if there are people on the call who have developed or contributed to the development of training materials on specific restoration activities or specific restoration business models that they would like to see highlighted and integrated in the curriculum, that's something that we would be very happy to discuss.
Thank you for the clarifications. Do we have any more questions? We have 6 minutes left on the scheduled time. Would anyone else like to raise a specific issue or like to discuss anything else?
I have asked if the training material can be widely beyond the program itself, so then they can reach the people who can access the program. It's not top down, then it becomes really valuable. We already received the funding to develop the material anyway. So it's just a step towards making inclusion in numbers. I understand the quality may be compromised because they don't have any mentorship, but then you make it much widely available. And that's in collective intelligence.
I can go. That's really the goal, Marcia. At this moment, the way that we work is we receive funding for a specific country scope of program scale that it can be launched in. So we already have it in 3 countries and planning to scale to many more in 2023. And of course, as we go into new places, we need to adapt the content, the language, the local partners that we're working with. So for sure, when we start working with indigenous communities, we will want to work with NGOs or associations that are aware about the different challenges that they face. But we will also need to evaluate, are we the best scheme and structure to help them with what they have? Because maybe some in-person workshops or field experts would be more fit for purpose. So I think it's a matter of adapting when we can, but also being mature enough to step back when it's a segment of entrepreneurs or of people working in biodiversity that we're not in a position to support. And I think this will figure out as we scale to more and more remote places.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you, Marcia. We just have a few minutes left. So in the meantime, if we receive more questions in the chat, in the meantime, I would just like to say to everyone that the recording of this session will be made available, as well as the presentation you have seen. So we will be making them available to everyone. So feel